Well, welcome everyone to today's Pulsating Practices, a webinar series hosted by the Taos Institute. We're really happy that you were able to join us today, and we're very much looking forward to this presentation. So I will give just a few words of introduction about the Taos Institute. We are a nonprofit organization, and we offer resources on social construction and relational practices. We do many different activities, so free webinars like this series. We have an online community that you have probably already visited and signed up for this event through. So this is the Taos Institute Commons. It's free to join, and it's really a platform where we have over 2,600 members from all over the world. It's an opportunity to connect with one another. There is a discussion board. There are lots of free books available for downloading. There is a self-paced course, an introduction to social construction, that we invite you to consider. And we also organize conferences and workshops, courses, lots of different activities. So I don't want to take too much time, so we're going to jump right in with our presentation today. So we are so lucky and so grateful to have today Norma Romm and Francis Akena Adyanga. So welcome, and thank you so much for hosting this presentation today. Our topic for the day is facilitating participant dialogues in research. So Francis and Norma, the floor is yours.
All right, maybe you can already start sharing the slides.
Yes, I will do that. Is this working? Are you seeing the first one?
Yes, I'm seeing the first one. We're seeing the first one. Right. And now that we're talking about the slides, just to mention, this very pretty presentation of the slides was made by Alex. And Alex has been extremely helpful all the way along. So we need to definitely thank her. She helped us deciding on the topic, deciding how to present it, going through our draft slides a few times. So she's been ultra supportive for the last month, and we need to thank her for that.
My pleasure.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Norma, for acknowledging the good work that Alex has done and supporting us. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you. My name is Francis Akena, and I am calling in from Uganda. So today, myself, Norma, and there is the third person, Ambrose Tolit. We will be talking, but mainly Norma and I will be talking from a study that we conducted. Two of the studies in Uganda. And then one of the study was conducted by Norma and other people in South Africa, but both of them focus on how relation in research can contribute to building peaceful coexistence. So my name is Francis Akena, and I am an associate professor at Kabale University in southwestern Uganda. It's a government university. And my colleague here, Norma Romm, is a professor emeritus extraordinary at the University of South Africa. At the time of conducting this study, Norma was a professor at the University of South Africa. So Norma and I also, we have like a personal relationship. We knew each other because when I was a postdoc at the University of South Africa between 2006 and 2007, Norma Romm was my mentor. So we worked collaboratively, and we also worked on another project that used indigenous research method in Mpumalanga. And so it was a very successful project funded by the University of South Africa. And later, when I came to Uganda, I continued working with Norma with the whole aim of getting people to come together, have a conversation, and make their society a better place through relationship. And therefore, our study today, we have picked on 3 such studies, but we shall mainly be concentrating on 2, one from Uganda and one from South Africa. Now, I want to make mention that our study acknowledges that in many indigenous traditions, creation, as we know it, is an ongoing process. And our studies also reveal that the world is not something that is completely stuck in the past. However, it is a continuously coming into being through interaction, relationship building by the different entities that exist in the different community where we did our study. And therefore, you will realize from our study, this is the preamble, that our study has demonstrated how a nurtured relationship with the land, with people, and with animals, with supernatural forces, and the knowledge that is collectively co-created can become a powerful tool in shaping society through mutually agreed upon measures and coexistence. In this way, our study drew on the experiences of other researchers that focus on relationality and indigenous epistemologies from different parts of the world. Specifically, we draw on the work of two main scholars, and that is Sean Wilson and Margaret Kovac. All these are indigenous scholars from Canada. But I will now not go into the detail of that. I will straight away invite Norma to dive into the second slide. But before I do that, I want to once again say thank you for tuning in from the different parts of the world. And this is entirely, I think, the main aim of the Taos Institute. And we thank them also so much for bringing us together. Norma, the floor is over to you. I hand over the microphone to you.
So like Francis said, basically we're talking about the world as ongoing and the way in which we process our thoughts and our constructions makes obviously a difference to how the world unfolds. And what we're doing is explicitly using the research process for that end. In other words, the world is co-created, and now we're thinking how research can help in the co-creation of worlds in becoming, you can say, between co-researchers. So the idea is obviously that it's not just some professional researcher expert who does some research and then reports on it. It's about people together creating constructions that will guide forward-looking action. And Francis mentioned some authors like Wilson and Kovac, but just to mention, Donna Mertens labeled a process called transformative research. Actually, it comes from also critical theory and emancipatory research, but she called it the transformative paradigm. And Begeli Shalisa from Botswana has also become quite famous in talking about the indigenous paradigm of research. And that is actually using the indigenous worldview that Francis alluded to when he said about us being in relationship and having relations with the land and supernatural forces and animals and all of creation, basically. And the indigenous paradigm in particular is saying you use research to forward relationality across the board. It's not just with people, with the human world, it's that you're also recognizing that you're part of a much bigger world. Some people talk about the more than human world even. So another point I want to make is that some indigenous scholars like Fiona Cram also refer to Ken Gergen's understandings of relational being. So this idea of relationality cuts across indigenous paradigms and obviously transformative paradigms and Ken's work on relational being. And the idea is to use research to strengthen relationality in all our processes of knowing and being. That is the point of transformative and indigenous research paradigms. You're using the research process towards that end. Good, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so today we're going to offer 3 examples, and like Francis said, the first one will give most detail. We'll skim through the second one, depending on how the time works, and then we'll move on to the third one. The first 2 are actually set in Uganda. And what we want to also mention to you, as we're talking, please put any comments or questions or ideas into the chat box, and Luke will help to look at the chat box and intervene at good points so that we can all talk about whatever's been said in the chat box and we can respond. So please feel free to enter your interjections at any point. But in the meanwhile, we'll start with our first example. And that was set in Northern Uganda in the dates you can see there. It actually was during COVID times, and I wasn't able to travel. In fact, in the first example, also not. But I don't know the local language anyway, in Northern Uganda. So it was Francis, basically. And at some point, Ambrose Tulit entered the project, like Francis mentioned. But basically what we were doing is setting up focus group discussions with people. And Francis's words here are saying that he encouraged storytelling and compassionate listening. And the idea was to try and make more peaceful coexistence between farmers and pastoralists who were in tension, which we'll explain just now. The idea was to try and rebuild trust. So what we want you to think about while we're talking is the dialogue tools you've also used in your context to foster reconciliation when there's tension in a community, and also how you build research with communities. That's the point of also transformative and indigenous paradigms of research. You work with communities. You don't see yourself as an outsider. So that is just a point we're starting off with. And now we can move to the next slide. Good, here's a little picture. That's Francis. And this is just giving you a tiny idea of the setting of the research. All of these focus groups in all the projects that we were involved in basically are taken outside. It's done in non-rainy season so that people can meet outside and talk around a circle, basically. This happens to be an example of Francis in one of the workshops that was held after the focus group sessions in our first example. So we'll explain just now that this was actually an important part of the project, was to have a dissemination or discussion workshop, or two of them in fact, which were attended by the focus group participants from all the 4 groups. And actually we had extra people from the community, which shows that there had been interest in the community. People had been speaking about the research, and other people also wanted to join and hear our so-called reporting and also add additional input. So that's just a kind of setting of the research. You can do the next slide, Alex. And what we were doing was exploring with the participants, note the word with, it was in Amaru district of Northern Uganda, and there had been land-related conflicts. That's quite a long story. And if you ever wanted to see the long story, you could read an article that we produced for the Qualitative Research Journal. Sorry, it's called the Qualitative Report. That's the journal. And we did produce an article in 2025 where we explained the history of the conflict, but we're not going to go into that now. Basically, the farmers in the area were there before, and then the pastoralists came in, the herdsmen, and this started creating tension between the communities. So what we did is we constructed 4 mixed focus groups. I use the word mix, meaning there was a mix of pastoralists. There was a mix of pastoralists, I mean pastoralists and farmers. You know, they were all mixed together in all the groups. There were elders from both communities. There were obviously women and men. There were young people. We were trying to include different sections and also make sure that we had leaders from the pastoralists and the farmers in all the groups. And we then enable them to discuss their concerns in relation to our prompts. In other words, that was kind of our role, that we saw that we were creating prompts for discussion, which would help people to, like Francis said earlier, brainstorm, express their concerns, express their stories, and try and come to some kind of reconciliation. I see that someone said in the chat box, the futility of assumptions about how to do proper research. Yes, we're not trying to say proper, we're just trying to give an example. And what we did was a focus group in that we had 13 people in each group, and we raised questions for them all to discuss. Yes, the paper did eventually get published, but the main point was to help people in the community to think through their concerns and to find possible ways for reconciliation. And you'll see later that the people expressed heavy appreciation for what we had done by bringing them together to discuss issues in relation to our prompts, which were prompts towards basically reconciliation. And what we also did as researchers, but not researchers in the traditional sense of just making analyses that could then be published for academic audiences, we did analyses to be shared for discussion in community workshops. And these analyses were actually also pointing to areas for reconciliation that people had kind of mooted in the focus group sessions, but now we were drawing them out in our analysis to remind people that they were finding scope for reconciliation. And actually in the workshops, people were very pleased that we had drawn out where they had found spaces for reconciliation. And also we had asked the people in the focus groups for recommended future actions, and the people expressed appreciation of that. So we will point to some feedback received from them about their experience of the whole research. And by the way, we also shared a report with the resident district commissioner. That's quite a long story. That's like the political arena in Uganda. That in fact got reported to a ministerial committee. That got reported to the minister. And there was some kind of progress in that regard. So we can go through now to the next slide. And now what we were doing, you know, we were so-called professional researchers, but we saw ourselves as part of the community, worried about their concerns. And what we did was try and use questions that would encourage people to think of possibilities for reconciliation. So for instance, we said, what accounts for the increased migration of the word people were using at the time was Balalo pastoralists into Northern Uganda. As it happened during the focus groups, a lot of these cattle keepers said they don't like that word because pastoralists implies that they are nomadic, and Balalo implies that, and they had settled in the area, so they wanted to be seen as part of the community. That was one of the points of contention. And then we also had asked, how have the practices of the pastoralists influenced agricultural activities? We kept it kind of open so that both sides could talk about how they felt it had influenced them. And the farmers at first were saying their crops were being destroyed by the cows because the cows were coming in and eating their crops. But on the other hand, some people were saying, as a matter of fact, these cows are also helpful because there are cows in the area, they're selling the milk at low prices to the farmers and also improving their stocks. So some of the farmers were saying, we don't want our crops destroyed. On the other hand, we do see advantages of these pastoralists here. So they could locate problems, but they also saw advantages. And we were drawing that out, as I say, because it was ultimately making people realize there's possibility for reconciliation. And then we actually asked, how can they live together? And one of the suggestions was that the leaders from both communities should be brought together to discuss issues where the farmers' crops were being destroyed and to think about appropriate compensation. Some of them suggested the pastoralists themselves could grow some crops for fodder for their cattle. So there were many recommendations which we also drew out when we looked at all the 4 focus groups. We put it all together and discussed that in community workshops. Yes, I see that this person, Apurv, wants to read our paper. Alex is intending to send out some URL sites by email, I think, and maybe some other forum. And there you'll see that we've got the site, which is the site that takes you immediately to our paper. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So what happened is we did an analysis, again, as so-called professional researchers, but we didn't do it in the normal vein that most qualitative researchers or interpretive researchers do, that they locate themes and they just give examples of the themes. We didn't do it that way. We were trying to express transformations in relations that were being expressed during the meetings. So for instance, one of our so-called key findings or themes, we said pastoralism and food security pros and cons, which were brought forth in the discussion to remind people that they were seeing possible advantages, they were seeing cons, but on the other hand, in relation to the cons, they were thinking of recommendations. Some people mentioned improved household incomes because, in fact, the pastoralists were buying the crops and the vegetables of these farmers. So it wasn't all that these farmers were saying, we don't like these pastoralists who came into the community. It was a process of people thinking together and telling their stories about possibilities for reconciliation. And what we did is in the workshops, again, we weren't making a big academic paper, which you'll see if you read our paper. The idea was not to present an academic paper for academic audiences. The idea actually was to report to the workshops in a nice, succinct way, drawing out what we saw as quotes from the participants, which would recognize that there were points of potential reconciliation. So that's how we did the so-called thematic analysis. It was transformative thematic analysis. And I see here, oh, I see, good. I see someone said something about this anyway in the chat box. I won't look too carefully. I'm just seeing behind a paywall. Anyway, can email you a copy if you don't have access. Maybe that's Alex saying that. Anyway, what we did is in the workshops, we focused on drawing out their own recommendations from all the 4 groups so that the whole set of focus groups could see what had been recommended in all the groups and could think about if it was helpful for them. And then they would also have a way of thinking of ways forward together. What is interesting, like I think I said already earlier, it wasn't only the focus group people who came to the workshops. People from the rest of the community also came because our research had become known within the community. Let's look at the next slide now. Right, this was our dissemination. We call it dissemination, but it's dissemination in quotation marks because we weren't doing normal method that we just disseminate findings, and here are our findings. We were actually asking people to think if they want to add anything, to think if we left anything out, to discuss what had been happening there. And so this is how we were organizing the workshops. And I just want to mention that when Francis actually said to people, is there anything you want to add? There were 2 workshops, but I took a quote from one workshop from our article, or we took a quote. And I like this one because the woman says, I'm happy that you've taken the important steps of coming to talk to us. Find out how we are relating. You can see this is a relational understanding. And she says, I want to admit most of the Akoli people, these were the people in the host community, the farmers, have been very hospitable. They welcomed us. We don't have much problem. These are small issues, can be sorted out. And then she actually says, I want to request that the leadership of this, she means the farmer community, should formally integrate our leaders, she means the cattle keeper community, into the community leadership committee so that we can contribute our voice. So she's saying we need to have the leaders come together in one committee. And then a man talks and says, you people have clearly captured the main issues we shared with you in last year's meeting. I like the part of the recommendations, how to improve relations in our community. It's my prayer that we follow these recommendations so that we can continue to improve our well-being. So you're getting a feeling here. As I say, there were many quotes and there are extras in our article, but you're getting a feeling of how people were experienced the focus group sessions. And actually there was such a reconciliatory tone in these workshops that Francis was telling me the other day, these were very important part of so-called data. It's not that the data was collected only during the focus groups. It started being, if you want to call it, collected again or generated again during these workshops where people are coming again together and reconciling their original conflict and seeing that there's possibility for reconciliation. So we can go to the next slide, Alex. Oh, yes. We also, at the end of the workshops, as I say, there were 2 workshops and, there was a lot of discussion. But at the end of each workshop, Francis sought feedback. And now I'm just indicating to you how he did that. You've seen that nice slide of a picture of Francis out in the open talking to people. And he's talking to them in the context of a workshop. There were obviously lots of other people. That was just one picture. But he solicited feedback. And he asked them, how did you think today's meeting was handled? What do you think about our method of holding this meeting? Because the whole idea was to, as we said earlier, we were trying to get people again to reconcile their views and to think of ways forward. And one of the men, this is actually another workshop from the quote we took earlier, one of the men said, I like the way the meetings were conducted, beginning from last year up to this moment. You did a good job giving us the opportunity to fully express our ideas on how we see the problems in our community. So as I say, people were indicating how they see the problems, but in the meantime, they were looking for solutions. I'm just adding that. He didn't say that. He says, I thank you for letting us see each other's way of defining the problems. And then a woman says, my name is something or other. You did a good work in the way you led us in this meeting. Even we, the women, were encouraged to speak out. You saw that slide that I had taken yesterday from the 6 that Francis sent to me. I just chose one because Alex said she wants some pictures, but I took the one with the women. And these women were saying, you encouraged us to speak out. In most meetings in our community, our opinion as women is often not sought. Men just talk and conclude things without hearing from us, which isn't fair because we always suffer more than men in the villages. Therefore, I request you to write down women voices well so that other people can also read it. So, of course, when we did our reporting finally, in our reports, in fact, to the RDC, the resident commissioner, and also the reporting in the article we wrote, we did obviously include the women's voices as she had asked. But what was interesting is that when she said this, there was applause and laughter in the whole meeting. And by the way, these workshop meetings were altogether 56 participants were there, about half in each meeting. But people were applauding what the women had said. And there's another example in our article again of the people applauding what some women were saying. So we think that we also helped during the project to renew the gender relations in the community, because together in these workshops, the men were applauding the women. So I think we can go to the next slide. I think that may be where Francis comes in. Okay, Francis, you're going to talk now about your conversation with a pastoralist leader later in the year.
Thank you so much, Norma. You did an excellent job bringing it up to this point. And ladies and gentlemen, I now want to speak about a conversation I had with the pastoralist leaders in the year 2022. And this is after Norma gave me a telephone call and inquired if the recommendation from the focus group discussion and then from the study dissemination meeting that took place the following year in a dialogical process, if their recommendation was being implemented. Now, because I live about 800 kilometers from the study community, we did the study in Northern Uganda. I am at the extreme opposite end in southwestern Uganda, and it took me 2 days of driving to get there and 2 days to come back. So I could not go back physically. So I gave the leadership of the leaders of the pastoralist community a telephone call. And during the telephone conversation, I was simply asking the same question that Norma had asked me, and that is if the collectively agreed recommendation was being implemented. And the pastoralist leaders was very excited. He said that they had started implementing some of the recommendations, and then he said that there are many things that they are doing as the community, both the leadership from the pastoralist group and the leadership of the farmers group. And they said what they were doing was aiming at reconciliation, the restoration of positive relationship, because when the pastoralists walked into the community, they found that the farmers were living very peacefully. But they acknowledged that their coming into the community brought unrest, and mainly because the pastoralists were raising many herds of cattle, and sometimes the herds of cattle would not fit in the land that they were hiring or the land that they bought. And as a result, the cattle were going out and trampling the foods of the farmers, destroying and eating them. So the pastoralist leaders told me they are restoring relations, and that they, the pastoralists, had already migrated to the study context, that is Northern Uganda, on permanent basis. And because of the reason for their migration on permanent basis, they were not interested in seeing anybody messing up the well-being of the farmers as well as their well-being. Therefore, he said that they would not tolerate any behavior that would turn the farmers, the host community, against them, the pastoralists. And he said that their community is very grateful to the researchers, that is myself and Norma and Ambrose, for creating a platform which brought them together to explore a dialogue which would lead to peaceful coexistence. This is not, he pointed out clearly. So in his own word, he said, we have planted the seed of dialogue. And therefore, I would say that it is now up to them to keep on watering the seed to protect, to grow into a mature tree that would bear fruits. Now, as we put in the footnote, it also happened that the cattle keepers did comply. Not all the cattle keepers complied with the presidential directive, because previously the president of Uganda had issued a directive that all the pastoralists who had moved to northern Uganda should fence their land, and they should also provide water point for their animals, and then they should demonstrate that they have legally acquired the land or that they are renting the land. So the leadership also acknowledged that not all of them had complied, but they were working towards compliance as a way of nurturing relationships. I should reiterate what Norma said previously, that during the study dissemination meeting and the data collection process, our main methodology was rooted in indigenous research method, and from there we drew on storytelling and compassionate listening, where we brought the farmers who were the most aggrieved and the pastoralists, so they can sit and have a conversation. So the farmers explained in detail how the behavior of some reckless pastoralists who engaged in the practice of open grazing was causing food insecurity. And because the animals were destroying their crops, and then how the farmers, or how the pastoralists sometimes refused to compensate the farmers, then how some of the pastoralists were behaving with impunity, carrying illegal guns, and threatening the farmers. So during the process of storytelling, so the farmers told their stories, and then the pastoralists compassionately listened with empathy. And at the end of the day, there was conciliatory tones in which the pastoralists acknowledged their mistake, but they said that this was not the position of the pastoralists, and that all of them had migrated to northern Uganda on permanent basis, and they do not want any behavior that destabilized the relation. And therefore, this guy promised that they would work on addressing the behaviors of few reckless pastoralists who were behaving in a way that soiled the name of the pastoralists. And like Norma mentioned, the pastoralists also expressed their complaint against the farmers. The first one was that the farmers were using condescending label against them, calling them balalo, which means nomadic pastoralists. It's kind of condescending. And so they requested that they prefer to be called cattle farmers, while the farmers in northern Uganda were making, growing food crops, but the pastoralists were saying, for us, we are cattle farmers, we need to coexist, let us avoid use of condescending language. And then the pastoralists also complained about their being misunderstood, because the local farmers were saying that the pastoralists were disrespecting the culture. When they come to the water point and they find men or women bathing, they would just walk through. Now, the practice in the research community is that when you are approaching a river, you have to first shout out and say, is anybody there bathing? So that if someone is bathing, they'll say, yeah, we are bathing. And if the person bathing is a man, is a lady, then the pastoralists are men. So you have to first wait with your cattle until they finish bathing and they change. But the pastoralists would just walk through when women are bathing, and the women felt very embarrassed. So the farmers were saying this is disrespecting the local farmers, disrespecting the culture, which the pastoralists acknowledge. So the pastoralists also expressed in part of telling their story as part of storytelling and compassionate listening, that they were ignorant of the local culture and they are willing to be educated instead of being called uncouth and all sorts of names. So this was a very interesting conversation I had with the pastoralist leaders, and later the local leaders of the community also acknowledged that they were working on reinforcing relationship. And then the part that Norma mentioned, you will see later if you read the detail that the women on the pastoralist communities also weigh in their voice, as well as the women from the farmers. So at the end of the day, there was a strengthened gender voice, especially women voices, which reinforced gender relationship in the community. Because the women were also concerned, especially from both the farmers and the pastoralist side, that men often take decisions without consulting them. So the storytelling and compassionate listening brought other problems, which transcended the boundary of the land conflict, which Norma and I and Ambrose had gone to investigate. We can move to the next slide. Maybe Norma can dive in again.
All right, so now we have another example, but let's see if there's anything. I see these little comments that I think are from Rollo, which I'm too afraid to play around with. Yes, it's from Rollo. Rollo, did you want to say more, or are you just happy with what you've put in the chat box? And does anyone else want to say more?
I'm happy with what I said. I mean, it all emerges from the lifescaping action research that I use, but I just see a huge crossover. It's really lovely work. And I was basically celebrating what you're doing.
Well, that's sounding quite good. So does anyone else want to say something? Yeah, yes, I see
Maybe
Forrest.
Norma,
Yeah.
maybe we can finish, then we leave the Q&A session. People can say
We
something
can
at the
also
end.
do that. And I'll
Yeah.
just quickly comment on Mimi Forrest, who's saying this is community-based participatory action research. Yes, you can see a strong connection there. And a lot of people do say that the Indigenous research paradigm actually links up with community-based participatory action research. Now, action research, well, it all depends how we define it, but some people see action research is that you try and develop cycles of action and research, and more action and more research. This wasn't quite the action research cycle as traditionally understood, but I call it active research, meaning you using research with the intention that there will be change. But it's not quite the cycle of action research, which some people define as action research. So in some ways, we rather would call it active, just to show that you're not trying to do, all these cycles. You're just trying to enter a community. And funnily enough, like Dan Welf, who I think is sitting in the session, and Sally St. George, they've got a nice expression saying we are all researchers trying to chart a way forward. So it's not like you have to define something as action research and start following the cycles recommended by action researchers. It's more that you're putting people together and realizing we're all researching issues that are of concern to us and trying to chart a way forward. So that's just one response to this idea that it's action inquiry. Yes, it is kind of action inquiry. And it's also active inquiry, where you specifically are trying to make a difference in, like Francis said earlier, the world in becoming, because you see the world as in becoming, that it depends on how you interact that makes the world. So now we do have, does anyone else want to say something? I see Francis is saying, let's leave question and answers to the end. So should we follow what?
Maybe just a quick one. I would like to acknowledge Ambrose, who was the co-researcher, has just joined the meeting. And
good.
Yeah, and then I have some good number of my graduate students who have promised me they'll show up. I can see them also in. So Norma, you can
That's
continue.
nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Oh, right. Good, Francis. Oh, so by the way, Francis is using some of these examples with his students, which is also good because it's a way for his students to also recognize ways in which you can do research with communities and try and, like Dan Wolf and Sally St. George say, chart a way forward through the research process. And you're not really catering only for academics, but when you do write for academics or people situated in academia, you're also helping them to realize how you can do research even as a so-called academic by working with people and not seeing yourself as an outsider. So now in the next example, let's see how the time is. It's 4:45. So I've got a little bit of time, seeing that no one's asking questions yet. But I won't take too long on this one. This is another example from Uganda. And it's also written up in TQR, that's the Qualitative Research Journal. This one was written up in 2022. It's actually was an earlier project we did. But again, we were trying to signal to the people that please, they mustn't see us as outsiders to the community. We are so-called professional researchers. We come from the university, but we're seeing ourselves as part of the community. And in this case, it was a community that was distressed because some foreign companies, foreign-owned companies had come into the area, and according to them, they were disrupting the social relations. They were basically exploiting the people and not being fair with the people in terms of their economic practices. But worse than that, they were also destroying, which Rollo will appreciate because he was talking about the land. They were destroying the land. Their waste was going into the rivers. Their waste was killing off the fish. The people were not at all happy with the practices of these foreign-owned companies that weren't interested in preserving the environment, and were causing problems for the community, especially that this community, like many indigenous communities, see themselves as part of the land, part of the water, part of the fish. They see themselves as connected with these so-called non-human elements, or more than human elements for that matter, more than human beings, earth beings. So they were not at all happy that the web of relations, as they called it, the web of relations, including natural forces and the forces of nature, were becoming destroyed through the way in which these foreign companies were acting. Now, luckily, just like in many countries these days, there is an environmental agency that can come in and check how these firms are operative. But at first, the people in the community were telling us that they tried other means, like going and speaking to the people and telling them they must make changes, and speaking to the leaders in the community to go and speak to the factory. But none of that actually helped. So in the end, what they did, they were telling us, they made use of the media, and they put it all over the radio. And once they did that, these leaders began to realize these people are serious. And then they did, in fact, call in the environmental agency. And the environmental agency stopped. In fact, it was one factory that the people really didn't like their practices. And so the environmental agency stopped that factory from operating. So in some sense, the community did achieve success. But what we were asking them was to think through how they had managed. And again, funnily enough, the women's voices came out quite strongly, because the men even agreed that initially they were thinking it could just be handled at household level. But it was the women who said, we have to get together as a community. It's only through community strength that we're going to manage to make a difference. And the women said, let's hold community meetings. Normally, as Francis was saying earlier, when the men hold their meetings, they don't even involve the women. But the women were saying, we need to set up community meetings to think about how we can act. And so the women's voices came out quite strongly. And the men, again, within the group sessions, were saying, thanks to the women who told us that we need to act as a community, etc. So they were, again, like applauding the women for being involved in the whole process. But what happened again is we were, in this particular case, we were saying to people, we are not outsiders. We ourselves are concerned with when companies come in and destroy the social relations and destroy the environment. And we're part of a community. Not only you are in this community, it's a worldwide community that is worried about factories and corporations that basically are acting irresponsibly. So we said to the participants, tell us what you think you've learned, what learning you've learned through your involvement in your resistance, and tell us also what you think we should share with wider audiences. So again, we were saying to people, you have been researchers, you're now researching together, you've helped even in these focus groups to research what you've been doing and to think carefully how you've been acting. Tell us how you think we should display the result of this research to wider audiences. And that's also part of the Indigenous paradigm, by the way, that when you tell stories, you actually tell it in a way that the participants would endorse. So you're not just taking their stories and then making it your own and saying it the way you think. You're taking people's stories and asking them, what would you like to share for the benefit of wider audiences? So this was also like a twist to traditional research, where you don't actually ask the community, how would you like to impact on the wider community and wider audiences? And what have you learned? Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so advice from the Indigenous paradigm is the most important advice is you organize your research around the concerns of, I've put here prospective participants, because you don't know in the beginning until you get consent that they will be participants, but you do know that there are concerns in the community. And so you're going to be dealing with these concerns. You don't start formulating your research topic on the basis of a literature review. You formulate it on the basis of what you've heard in the community is a problem. And you use relational sampling. That is actually, Francis mentioned Kovach, Margaret Kovach. She uses this idea of relational sampling. Again, it's not you go in and choose who you want to participate and say to them, do you consent? It's a whole relational process where people agree to be involved because they can hear that it's going to benefit them. And you gain consent. And in this case, you're talking with communities who have not got often don't have formal educational training and often are not literates in writing. So what you're doing is you're using an oral method, but through the oral method, you are inviting people to participate. And we had clever ways of telling them the normal things that happen in these written consent forms. Like you say, you have the right to withdraw. We said to them, you have the right, if you do attend a focus group meeting, if you don't feel like speaking, you don't have to speak. This was because we realized they could be embarrassed if they suddenly walk out of the meeting, so-called right to withdraw. So we did clever things of making them realize they could come to a meeting, and if they came and they didn't like the fact that they had to contribute, they didn't have to. So that was like a withdrawal, but without embarrassment. But anyway, we had quite a lot of nice things that we did that is in that article. Say something, Francis.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about the ethical process. Yes, like Norma rightly articulated, and for us, the Uganda National Council of Science and Technology and the Research Ethics Committee require that people, it is very conservative, they require that people have to sign to say, yes, I accept to participate in the study, I put my signature, and then all the other things. So when we went to the community, practically, we realized that this was not plausible. In the first place, most of the people who turned up were illiterate. That means they did not go to school, they could not read and write. And so also secondly, given that we were handling a very sensitive topic in both of the two case studies, the first one regarding the conflict between the farmers and the pastoralists, and then the second example where there was this multinational company that established a factory and was polluting their water and was not wanting to be held accountable. So people were not comfortable putting their names anywhere. So they were suspicious, but they trusted we, the researchers. However, they were not sure if they signed where their signature would end up and if it might attract some form of retribution. And then there were those who could not read and write. So we then brought the option of oral consent. And then we were discussing with the community how we can orally consent. So our idea initially was that people would individually consent, maybe in the presence of their community leaders or in the presence of someone they trusted. But in one meeting, a group of, in the focus group discussion, I think consisting of about 12 people, the leadership was there. People just decided unanimously that they want to consent collectively. And so then I would ask them a set of questions. Do you consent to participate in this study voluntarily? After reading to them the consent process, and unanimously they said, yes, we consent. But now there were a few people who kept quiet. They did not say we consent or we don't consent. So I then said, how about those who kept quiet? If you feel you don't want to consent and you cannot participate in the study, feel free to leave. Now, when I said that, then one of them said, yes, I consent. But there were a few others who kept quiet. So then the leaders, the community leader says that I want to assume that if you choose to stay, it means you have consented. And therefore, like the researcher, meaning me and Ambrose, like the researcher said, if you don't want to participate, you can just, I mean, if you don't want to say anything, you can keep quiet. If you want to say anything, you can talk. But if you feel you don't want to consent, you can feel free to leave. So interestingly, no one left, and I was so pleased that many of them actively participated. So this also points to the fact that sometimes the institutional review board requirement is excessively above the reality and practicality on the ground. When you decide to insist that people consent, sometimes they may not give you the real information you are looking for. But if you allow people to talk freely without signing anywhere, knowing that there's no retribution and no one will come looking for them, then they open up. Yeah, Norma, back to you.
Yes, I like what you've said, Francis. And as a matter of fact, I was on the ethics committee for a long time at UNISA in the days that I was there. For 6 years, I was on that committee. And I managed, I don't know how, but I managed within the university, because we were having meetings also within the broader ethics section of the university. I did manage, because there were so many Indigenous people in our ethics committee that didn't agree with this idea of signing forms. I managed to feed it into our ethics policy that there was such a thing as oral consent and how it could be handled. So luckily at UNISA, I hope it's still in the policy, but we did actually manage to introduce it into the policy. But I know at most institutions, they don't like it because they're worried that the institution would be held accountable if people haven't actually signed something. But Shalisa also, this is Begeli Shalisa, who I mentioned earlier, she also was saying and is saying in her book on Indigenous research methodologies, careful of this idea of written consent. People think you're telling them to sign a contract and they are suspicious. So as I say, at UNISA, I managed to quote all these Indigenous people, and there were Indigenous people, of course, within our ethics meetings. So we did succeed in changing the UNISA policy. Now, I see someone is saying there's a good study. How do you intend to have the study inform policy? Okay, that is our first example. How we intended to have it inform policy. Well, by the way, someone's saying they have to run away, but the way that we inform policy in that first example is that we did give our report to the resident district commissioner. That person then shared it with the ministry. The ministry then shared it with the president. And the president did take into account, we think, because his lots of the meetings he later held with the community actually expressed what we had said. So we kind of informed policy, but there were further developments that Francis has alluded to. I think he's alluded to when he was discussing. Do you want to say something else about that first one?
Maybe later in the discussion session. We are running out of time. Perhaps you can wrap up, then we can go to Q&A.
Right. Good. So let's go to the next slide, which is, this is again about Indigenous research. You are basically encouraging community reflection and learning, meaning everybody's busy learning. And we, of course, as professional researchers, we're co-learning with the participants. We're learning a lot about their activities and what they're doing and what they're thinking and how they're moving forward and how they can strengthen relationality. So, and the idea is also, like I've said here, you organize your discussion of draft results with the participants and stakeholders. You don't send off your results without asking people how they feel that it should be reported upon, so that they don't feel cheated later, that they've participated in a study and suddenly the results don't reflect at all, you know, how they were thinking and wanting it to be given to other audiences. So we develop the analyses for wider audiences, and the idea is to do it in non-deficit character. That means you don't demean the communities, you actually draw out their strength. You show the contribution of Indigenous wisdom to discourses. In this case, it was a discourse on development. How are these people seeing development such that it's not about foreign companies coming in and destroying the social relations and the environment. So how do we think about development in a different way? And they gave very good ideas of how you could do development. You still could invite in the foreign companies, but you'd have to check them before they come in, check their record, make sure that they understand they have to be accountable to the community and to the environment. So, but these people were giving very good ideas of how you can define development so that it works better. And you can't just think, let these foreign investors come in and, hey, presto, you'll have development. So the idea is to write up the research results in a way which shows the wisdom of the community. And then the I made a little note here, or I think it's in our article anyway, but it's in our slides now, that it's a decolonizing agenda, basically. That's what it means by an indigenous research paradigm, is that you introducing a decolonization agenda. And that actually means, in indigenous parlance, it means you're using the research to strengthen relationality as a valued quality. And this means between professional researchers and others. That means you don't come in as experts as if you are the ones who are controlling the research. And it also means you making more relationality within the ecological fabric. So this is nice. Ilana's saying, nice, clear presentation. Yes, it has to develop in the world. And that's why it is important, actually, that one does hold these type of webinars and also write up the research, even in academic journals, because then more and more people read how these things are possible. Let's continue.
And Norma, we may not exhaust everything. Our time is up. I don't know if Alex want to give us more
Well,
time.
no,
I
it's
think
not up. We've got half an hour. Francis, we've got half an hour. It ends in half an hour.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
I wanted to just engage more in the Q&A and discussion session. But anyway,
We
let's
do
wrap
need
up.
to do that. We can definitely
Yeah.
do that. So I won't say too much more. I think we've said about this idea of co-exploring issues around development, the idea of community involvement. And yeah, I mentioned luckily about Dan Welf and Sally St. George, that we're all researchers, so we can move on to the next point. This is our third example, but let's see, Francis, should we take, in case anyone wants to ask anything about our first two examples, or should we just rush through and talk a little bit about the third one?
I propose we can rush through, then we go to the discussion or Q&A.
Okay, good. And if we want, if not enough people make interjections and questions and comments, we can do breakout sessions. We've made actually some nice questions for breakout sessions towards the end if people want to do that instead of joining the whole group. But anyway, that we can think of later. Let me go through this example then, which is the one in South Africa. This one, Rollo will appreciate very much if he's still here. And this is about actually really protecting all of creation. Because remember, Rollo was saying earlier about the ecological being and the importance of appreciating the land. Now, this was specifically designed, this project. COP means community of practice. And the idea was to protect Mupo. Now, Mupo in Venda, this project was set in Venda in South Africa. Mupo in Venda means life, basically. And so when you're protecting Mupo, you're protecting all of creation. And you're not seeing human beings as separate and superior to the rest of creation. That's why you even talk about the more than human world, meaning the whole of creation is important, and humans are just one thread in the web of relations. So in this particular project, I've actually put right at the top here, responsibility to heed the call through a community of practice. It means the call of nature, the voice of nature. You have to heed the call to protect the whole of life. And we did present this in a panel discussion of the International Society of the System Sciences with many members of our community of practice. And Mapateleni Makaululi, she actually founded an organization called Zomo la Mopo in 2007. That is the main community organization we were working with, but she had many, many links within Venda and even across the world. So we were working with her and all her villages and the people she's related to. And then we created a paper for the International System Society Conference. Again, like someone, I think it was Ilana, said, these kind of things need to be spread. And so we spread it in a panel discussion of the ISSS, and this became a paper in their journal. And in this example, you're going to see, you know, Francis mentioned Wilson, Sean Wilson, right in the beginning. Sean Wilson has written a book called Research is Ceremony. And the idea of ceremony is that you honor reciprocal relations, including with the natural world and invoking spiritual life forces. And this helps to change, realize you're honoring reciprocal relations all round. And the idea is also to realize that, I think you said this earlier, Francis, you're talking about sacred forces and you're talking about supernatural, I think was the word you used. So research as ceremony draws on that understanding that we're simply part of a much broader network of relations. And this is what this COP was all about, trying to extend relations all round. So let's continue. The next, yeah, here we are. Now this, Dazoma Lamopo is this organization founded by Mpateleni Makaululi, and this is DLM, Dazoma Lamopo. At one stage in 2022, lots of us from UNISA, plus some other people we invited into our COP, all went into some vendor villages where Mapati had been operating. And it was actually our community of practice officially started in 2021 through the University of South Africa. Just as a little aside, Patricia Latoli was my student at one stage, and also Francis's student, because Francis, like he mentioned, was a postdoc fellow at UNISA in 2016 and 17. And at that point, we were both supervising Patricia Latoli. Patricia Latoli is here. I don't know if you can see my finger, but anyway, Patricia Latoli is this rather large lady standing next to this man, and she's the project leader. So here she was giving a talk to the community about the community of practice, and the importance of what we were trying to do was to strengthen relations between different people in the community who could learn from each other, and also in conjunction with understanding our relations with nature. But what is important, why I chose this particular picture, I took these pictures, why I chose this particular picture for this presentation, it was Alex who said we must introduce some pictures, so I chose this one. These are drums, and this was showing, again, research is ceremony, and people were playing the drums at different stages. There's a lady called Rutenda Nagara, Ngara. She's an African woman, and she writes quite a lot. She's an author. She's quite a famous author, but she's also famous in many places around the world for her indigenous ways of thinking and being. And she's got a nice one that I picked up in a book that she was saying, we beat the drums because we are connecting with the heartbeat of nature, with the heartbeat of the life forces of nature. And that's what is happening when you're busy beating the drums. You know, lots of people think Africans beat drums, and we do know Africans beat drums. And the reason you're beating the drums is because it's like a spiritual act. You're connecting up with the forces of nature. So this was all part of our little ceremony there. And then you'll see these are, I just again took one photo of these people who were quite young, but they had learned from their elders, and they'd also learned from a particular organization called Participatory Guaranteed Systems, which is, it's an organic organization. It's actually all over the world, but also in South Africa. And within our community of practice, we managed to involve this one person, in fact, two people from PGS South Africa, Participatory Guarantee Systems, who teach people about organic methods of farming and about respecting nature and about being very careful of the chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and GMO seeds. So they teach people how to rather use organic methods. So here now are these youngsters, you can call them, within the community, busy sharing with the rest of the people what they've learned, and they like reinforcing the importance of protecting nature, protecting all of life, and not becoming prey to these big agri-business corporations which try and sell fertilizers and pesticides and GMO seeds, which in the end become harmful. So they were busy expressing that, and there was a lot of sharing going on within the community where people were sharing their practices, sharing what they've learned from their elders about protecting nature, sharing what they'd learned from these PGS facilitators. And we went to many villages. This is just one of them. And I saw now, when I was busy making these pictures, here's a box. And I just read today that the new thing is, apparently even in South Africa, people don't want to get their goods in plastic anymore. And even from when they order from big companies, they want it to be delivered in boxes and not in plastic. It's like part of environmental consciousness. But anyway, we can move on to the next slide. So, right, DLM, that's the Zoma Lamopo. It's trying to preserve cultural diversity, meaning we don't want just Western ideas of what development is and Western ideas even of what food security is, because a lot of people in the West still believe that food security is through using all these heavy fertilizers and heavy pesticides and GMO seeds. That's the so-called only way to be productive. And this is a critique of that. Many, many people all over the world are saying that, especially smallholder farmers don't want to be having to rely on these fertilizers and pesticides and GMO seeds, which not only are expensive, but they've experienced that it's harmful to the environment and harmful to their health. So that's what they call food sovereignty, meaning we must control the way in which our food systems are organized, and we mustn't be beholden to these big international corporations trying to sell us their products. So the construct of food security is signaling that you're empowering people to organize their food systems without the domination of these national corporations, multinational corporations, which destroy life. And it's been recorded in many indigenous societies how it degrades the land, it degrades the waters, etc. Francis, do you want to say something in there also?
I think you can proceed.
Just proceed. All right. So we work with DLM, and we also are like bringing in extra people into this growing community of practice to help revive or make more obvious this idea that we must be careful of the food regimes of the multinational corporations. So let's go on to the next one. Yes, so it's a community engaged project and it keeps growing. I won't say very much more, but the way in which we do it, you've seen here, I've said about Patricia Latoli is a project leader. The way in which we do it is that we keep expanding routes for social enterprises. Those are initiatives that are meant to help people as well as Mother Earth and don't treat people or nature as something to be exploited. And the idea is to undercut the agribusiness model for food security. All right, let's continue. Oh, I wanted to say here, Vonani Netchandama, she's actually the director of the Community Engagement Directorate at Univen, that's the University of Venda. And she's part of our COP. And what I did realize after I met her is she's actually at Taos Institute. We both realized that we're part of the Taos Institute. She was and I think part of Taos even before I became. But Mapati was her master's student. Mapati has now graduated, but Mapati, that's the one who founded DLM, was Vanani's master's student. So you can see all the good work Vanani's been doing. And she's writing in our paper that I've mentioned here, this ISSS paper, that will continue to forge strong links with DLM, with the community. We're building relationships between the university, the community, elders, university researchers, students, community members. And the idea is also to organize intergenerational learning in keeping with the spirit of Mupu, that's like the forces of life. And she's just explaining one of the things Norma Romm does was it has eco-mapping workshops to show the connections between how we as humans do things and the impacts of climate change. And she's saying it's a global issue, which we know. She's saying that these workshops organized by Norma Romm is a way of creating a sense of connection between our ways of living and climate change consequences. This is, again, the social constructionist idea. We are constructing our world as we live, and it's a world in becoming. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So Vernon is talking about these participatory guarantee systems, which, as I said earlier, it's an organic farmers network, and they are teaching people know-how in soil management, in organic pesticides, because there are very many ways in which you can use organic. You don't have to use these extremely harmful pesticides that these big corporations are inventing. And soil management, of course, to keep the soils good. If you put too much fertilizer, or in fact, any artificial fertilizer, you destroy the ecosystems within the soils. So participatory guarantee systems, we actually were able to get some facilitators from participatory guarantee systems in South Africa through one of the other people in our COP, Janet McIntyre Mills. She's in the University of Adelaide. She's also got links with us in UNISA. And she was the one who managed to introduce these PGS facilitators into our community of practice. But as I say, it's like a growing community, and the idea is for everybody to learn from each other. So I don't want to say too much more because we're talking about relationality and connections between people. And now let's see what this person has said. Yes, Indian ones are resisting it. Yes, that's Vandana Shiva. I don't know who said this because I don't know how to work this chat box, but I'm seeing now the early 90s. Yes, this is the point, that in South Africa, we're saying we have to appreciate the experience of the Indian people like Vandana Shiva, and there's another whole organization which is realizing that the multinationals were wiping out indigenous farming practices, and in the meantime, these indigenous people were experiencing degradation of their land, pollution, sickness. Yes, Vandana Shiva was a leading voice. And now we're trying to also say within our community of practice in South Africa, let's not follow that model, that green revolution, so-called, which was anything but green. So yes, let's carry on. Yes, perhaps we can switch away from advancing organics. I hope we now turn to your research practice. Well, okay, the research practice was bringing different people together. It's like a relational idea that research means you bring different people together with different types of expertise and different ways of having, for instance, experienced from their elders what worked for them, and different ways of handling the environment, different ways of even handling the politics when there are people who, trying to advance non-organics. So it's bringing people together to think about how to proceed and how to learn from each other in a community of practice which keeps growing. So it is our research practice, so-called. We are all researchers. We're all coming together to think carefully how we can deal with social and ecological justice in the world. And as I say here, Butchabella from PGS even managed to work with the Department of Agriculture to support some organic seed banks. And she's been educating some of their staff. So it's all about spreading this idea through developing more and more relationality between people and in connection with the environment. And it's also research as ceremony. So I hope that that's kind of answering your question about what the research practice is. It's about meeting people face-to-face in workshops, online, and bringing people together, all who understand the importance of social and ecological justice and can learn from each other. All right, should we go on to the next slide? I think we're finished now. So now, Francis, let's go on to the next slide, which is saying we can do two things. We can ask the people in this room to talk, to comment, to ask questions, or we can do breakaway groups. What's the best course of action?
Norma, I think just because we have only 10 minutes left, it's a little too short to do a breakout room. So I suggest we open it up here and invite anyone who wants to ask questions.
Yes,
or
good
comments.
idea. I like that. Can you show that next slide? Because that was just questions for the breakup group, but we could also all talk about that within this group if we think they're relevant questions. Let's see.
Yes, one moment. There are the questions.
Yes, it's there somewhere, I think. Yes, you see, this was if we were going to have a breakup thing, that people could share examples from their own community with building connections, human to human or human to more than human, and where that helped to shape outcomes. Like, as I say, with this COP in Dizoma Lomopo, we believe we've helped to shape outcomes. Many, many more people are using organic practices now in South Africa, including with the support from Dizoma Lomopo. So, but you can think of how your own work, maybe you want to mention something of some experience of yours. And then this is also saying, how can indigenous paradigms of relational being shift the way you think about research or practice, that you're trying to strengthen relationality all round. These might be possible things people could share within the whole group then, unless you've got other questions or other comments. We've got a raised hand. That's nice. Saliha Bava. Can you start talking, Saliha?
Yes. Thank you, Norma. Thank you, Francis. It's a wonderful presentation, wonderful work. And thank you again for how you're connecting different concepts and ideas in real time in the work that you're doing. There's so many places I can go, and I want to respect time. I was really appreciative, Francis, of your comment about the ethics and the IRB board and how high or off the ground they are in terms of what they're trying to get the researchers to do. And we all know as researchers, even when research design shifts, when we get to the field, like we have ideas and plans and we have to stay flexible to what arrives. And since both of you are with universities and work in this kind of academic and community spaces, I'm curious, how do you bring back that understanding to the IRB boards? And what shifts are you seeing in your respective spaces? Because in the US where I'm based, there is more, and Sally and you can talk a lot from what you're seeing at the qualitative report, there's more and more emphasis on not having one standard ethics that fits across the board, and to be much more like community-based ethics research. And there is more coming as a sensitivity to this issue that you bring. So I was curious, what are you seeing in your part of your worlds?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a question that we struggle with. I'm also a member of the Research Ethics Committee of the university. When I was at the University of South Africa with Norma, I was also a member of the UNISA Research Ethics Committee, especially the one of the College of Education. Now, in Uganda, it's a little bit more conservative, and they tend to stick to the conventional way of doing things. People have to sign, people have to consent, and people must be paid for their time in the study, which I'm okay with that. I'm absolutely fine with that. But the
Must
challenge
not
with
be
the thing
paid, Francis, must not be paid.
No,
Must
the
not be
Ugandan
paid.
one. No, the Ugandan one say you must pay people for their time.
Oh, really?
So this
Oh,
is
in
the
South Africa,
yeah.
they say don't pay. Oh, right.
Yeah, I was coming to that contradiction. Now, the Ugandan board, the Ugandan Institutional Review Board, that is the Ugandan National Council of Science and Technology, requires that people must be paid. And people must sign that they are paid, that they have been paid, that they received payment. Now, when I was at the University of South Africa, it says that people cannot be paid because payment would be interpreted as an inducement to participate and not voluntary participation. So I'll draw two examples. When I was at the University of South Africa, I was in the community, a very remote community. Norma had remained in the capital, Pretoria. And then the issue of payment came up, and people wanted to be paid. Now, the policy says people cannot be paid. So when I had the conversation with Norma, Norma sent an email and says, yes, much as the policy says people cannot be paid, we need to trade some little bit of flexibility here. Because I was explaining to Norma that I cannot go to this indigenous community and approach the elders empty-handed. I need to take something. Now, that something may be misinterpreted as form of payment or coercion or a form of inducement to participate. So when I had a back and forth conversation with Norma, Norma said, please go ahead and pay people. We even agreed how much they should be paid. And then Norma said, I can have that conversation with the Research Ethics Committee of the university. So how she sorted it out later, I'm not very sure. She'll speak about that, but it did not bring us problem. Now, the Ugandan one requires people to be paid. People are happy to be paid. The problem is participants do not want to sign. Remember the issue of signing, because you are now committing, you have to put your name, you have to put your signatory. So this became tricky. And then it also goes to the issue of signing the consent form. Now, I brought my experience from the field back to the Research Ethics Committee, the review board. And then we had that conversation. And at some point, they were even saying, no, we need to see where people have signed. We are doubting if you conducted the study. We are suspecting you could have fabricated the data. How do you conduct a study where there's no consent form signed? So when I explained the dynamic in the community, especially when you are engaging with indigenous people and people who have not gone to school, who are entirely, number one, suspicious of the government, of their own government. And then two, they are also suspicious of higher institution of learning as being agent of the state, going to collect some information about them, and then later using this data to the advantage of the state against the people. So when I pressed hard, eventually they relented. The good thing is that the study was funded by the University of South Africa. That was the good part of it. So then I had to say, UNISA does not require that we force people. The funder does not require that we force people to sign. So in that way, they relented. But I understand the dilemma you're talking of. It's a conversation I am having with the members of the review board. I'm also having with the National Review Board, which is the Uganda National Council of Science and Technology, who are insisting on people signing. Now, in the last workshop we had at the university on ethics, we had a senior person came from the national office. And then I brought this issue and he said, this is really very good because it's being drawn from practical experience in the field. Now, when I go back, I'm going to bring it to my colleagues so that we can make adjustment where possible to allow for oral consent. And the oral consent can be taken in the presence of another person or can be taken collectively as your experience has demonstrated. So I understand what you're talking about is an issue that we have to keep flipping back and forth. But the whole issue is that institutions are not willing to accommodate the different perspectives and experiences of minority group, in this case, indigenous people. And that is what we keep continuously advocating for. Maybe Norma, you can dive in and bring the example of the South African one, how you got the ethical review board to accept
I wanted to just also underscore one thing with Norma before. With there is such a constructed nature of what is consent.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The idea of gift, like if to go, like I come from a community that you never go empty-handed to someone's house, right? So when you think about research in that tradition, money is not the only form of gift. So what is gift, and when is it coercion? But I'm also curious, we live in times where there is more and more emphasis on economic justice. So there is this idea that now you should pay your participants for their time, just like the researchers' time is important. So it's not one thing that's driving this discourse or this construction. And how do we as researchers keep that complexity alive without reducing it to one thing, even as we educate IRBs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Norma can draw from the example of South Africa. Then if time allows, I can come back and pick up later.
Yes.
And
so
Norma, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to point out we have just a minute or two to wrap up. So I just wanted to invite everyone to maybe make some closing.
Can I just break in to offer an apology? I'm profoundly sorry I wasn't here from the very beginning. What you're doing, Norma and Francis, is just on the cutting edge of research today. It's we must share this with the world abroad, and I hope Taos can help to do that. Just incredible what you're doing, and my profound apologies. I had you on for noon today.
Thanks very much, Ken. Yes, we can share it, and that's a good idea. And if anyone else wants to quickly say something, they can, or else I'll quickly answer Saliha, how I handled that idea of the money, because interestingly enough, when Francis said to me when he entered the community that they are expecting, I think it was in Uganda. Oh, yes, of course, because in Uganda, you're saying that they expect to be paid. Now, our UNISA one, you know, doesn't want people to be paid. But funnily enough, when I said to them, this chief is expecting something in Uganda, and it did cost this amount of money, I was funding it from my research professor fund, and I wrote a memo explaining, and they actually paid it. So it shows that people can be flexible, and at UNISA, they were quite flexible. And also with the oral consent, we managed through working with the big shots in the community who were involved in ethics, we actually did manage to make oral consent a feature of the ethics policy. So like Francis said, you just have to keep trying. And it's good that Francis is now on all these special boards that are discussing the matter. Yes, so we've got 1 minute left. Do you want to wrap up, someone?
Yes. Yes, perhaps I can wrap up, Norma. At the end of this session, you can feel the energy that we cannot stop, you know, because your story is so inspiring and so hopeful too. So I think what you show today in your examples is that using this indigenous view, which comes very close to this social constructionist view, really can make change in our worlds. And as Ken is writing in his books, in this way we can co-create hopeful and better futures. And that's so hopeful in your work. And well, the words of Ken also was expressing how important your work is to show the world that we can do research in other ways, in different ways. And well, I think your example is very helpful in this. I like the word you were using, active research instead of action research, in activating people in the communities, making them researchers, but also doing this in their context. So also inviting the environment into your research and using traditions which are familiar to the people who are living in these communities. So I think what you showed with storytelling and compassionate listening, it can be used everywhere, I think, not only in South Africa, because it's so important that we value and appreciate everyone's voice, and especially people who we are not listening to. And then it's also my experience, then we can really make the change. So thank you for sharing this and for this great session today. I will give the word to Alex, who has some short practical things to tell, but thank you very much. And we will meet again, I think.
Yes,
Thank you
so
very
much,
much.
Francis and Norma. We're so grateful. And of course, this was recording. We will share the recording with participants who have registered, but it's also available in our online community, the Taos Institute Commons, and it's on YouTube. So feel free to invite your students, colleagues, friends, everyone to watch the recording and to connect with us. I shared Francis and Norma's emails in the chat, so they, I believe, welcome your comments and suggestions and continuing the conversation. So thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day or afternoon or evening.
And Alex, you can mention also the next Pulsating Practice in November.
Yes, so our next session will be in November, and you can find the details in the Taos Commons, if I can find it really quickly. So it's November 5th on strategies for opening master conflict narratives. So we hope you can join us then. Thank you, everyone.
Nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.